of what's off limits and what's on limits. But I think that dialogue, yes, needs to begin. That doesn't mean that you're revealing secrets about what you know or anything else.
It just seems to me as a reporter that the U.S. government hasn't been very anxious to talk openly about its possible use of offensive.
Well, but I mean, there's probably transparency and transparency. One of them is to have this discussion amongst the potential users, and maybe you start small and then you expand further. But I mean, initially you ought to talk, at least among, I would have said amongst the cyber powers, China, Russia, and so forth. And also we mention in our report, and we recommend a cyber alliance. I think we need to work closely with our NATO allies and others. Talk about under what circumstances would we use this kind of weaponry, if at all. And again, I think that requires a certain degree of transparency.
So, as former Director of National Intelligence, how do you assess this cascade of leaks we've had in the past weeks about the intelligence community's use of surveillance tools to track what's happening on the internet?
The use of warranted surveillance, completely legal and not really that new as far as I can tell. I'm trying to find out exactly what's new. There's nothing certainly conceptually new as compared to what we've been doing a number of years earlier. So how do I assess it? I find it shocking that somebody with clearances and who signs a confidentiality agreement to then turn right around and reveal publicly that kind of information. I think it's utterly reprehensible, and I hope the individual or individuals concerned get punished for it.
What's the population of people that have the kind of clearances that put them in a position to disclose information like that?
Well, there's some kind of trap in your question there, I think.
He's doing his job.
But, I doubt, however many thousands of people, or even hundreds of thousands who have top secret SCI clearances in our government, there aren't necessarily thousands who have access to that particular kind of information. To my sense of it, without having inside information anymore, is that that's a pretty darn restricted program, and access to it was probably very, very restricted indeed.
I'll link it to the task force. I think it echoes to the point that Stan was making, which is information sharing now is going to be a much harder legislative push, right? We clearly mistrust of the NSA was high beforehand, and it's going to be even higher. So CISPA-like bills are going to be harder to push through. The second is what we see, especially in China, is an already kind of inbuilt assumption that U.S. technology companies were in bed with the U.S. government, right? When you read writings from the Chinese about cybersecurity, they'll say, well, we are 80% dependent on U.S. companies for this and 70% on this, and of course these companies all have backdoors for the NSA. So no matter what happens with these findings, that perception is going to be widely reinforced in China. And so their efforts to keep U.S. companies out, to increase procurement standards from U.S. companies, to require U.S. companies to reveal their source code, all of that is going to happen. So for U.S. companies abroad, the operating environment is going to become much, much worse.
Well, we've rambled all over the place in this half hour, and that was, I think, kind of necessary in order to at least get a little bit of a sense of the sweep of this report, which is really very impressive. But it is your chance now to sort of focus in on issues that interest you in particular. We're going to invite you now to join in the discussion. We've got microphones. Please raise your hand, and then once you're called on, wait for the microphone to come to you, speak directly into it, and give your name and your affiliation. And please make it a question and not a speech, because I'm sure there are a lot of people that want to take part. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Bill Nolte from the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. I'm intrigued by the title of your report, and my question is, do you see the 4 adjectives in the report as really being linked to each other in a way that success in one depends heavily on success in achieving the others, or do you see them as operating independently to a greater degree?
Well, I, for one, would say that they're linked. Are they inextricably linked? I don't know if I'd go that far, but certainly the main objective for the internet is freedom, right? I mean, free use, free expression, free access, unhindered use and access to the internet. And in order to achieve that, you need some of these other things.
Yeah, I would agree with John. I mean, basically, I think especially it has to be resilient and secure for it to be open and global. So there's this interdependency. If it wasn't secure, I think it wouldn't be global because it would be clearly controlled by some entity, whomever that would happen to be. So I think they are, in many ways, connected, and that's how we've thought about it throughout the task force.
Holding the program up, that's a smart move.
I thought they'd be attracted to the report. Alan Rawl, Sidley Austin. I was intrigued by Mr. Palmisano's comment that to lead the world towards the objectives advanced in the report, we should lead ourselves here at home. And I wonder what you think about the implications of that for embodying our own internet policy, privacy policy, cybersecurity policy, and legislation. I think you did speak about not wanting to mandate from top down. But do you think the fact that we have not had a comprehensive privacy statute in the United States, the inability to enact cybersecurity legislation, and our hands-off approach to the internet, which really I think has led the world for many years, do you think that creates a bit of a policy void that doesn't let U.S. interests advance as they should be?
Well, I would start with we need a strategy. I hate to say that. It sounds so mundane. But what is our strategy? From a perspective of the U.S. national interest. If there is one with regard to the internet, I've not seen it. I've been involved in multiple committees, so I might not be knowledgeable of it. But is there really, what is the strategy? We go, I mean, in many ways, we go to the dark side of the internet. And clearly, privacy is the dark side of the internet that needs to be addressed. No one would, I think, at least in this part of the world, disagree with the fact that there are many issues around privacy, not just national security, protection of children and the like, that we need to have policies around. So, but I would do it in a strategic context, of that, right? I mean, it's not so simple to just say, well, we'll tell kids they can't use it. You can't use the internet to your legal age when you can drink at 21. Right? Then you can use the internet. I mean, that's not going to happen, right? But there could be rules of the road, there are parental guidelines. There's all sorts of things you can do beyond legislation, as we have in drug awareness and everything else. So kids do understand the implications associated with putting all their personal lives up on the internet because there are bad people out there. I think we need the strategy. And that strategy, many times, this is a personal opinion, and we discussed this in the task force, it gets overwhelmed by national security and underwhelmed by personal and economic interest. Right? And we tried to accomplish in the task force a balance between national security and personal and economic interest, commercial as well. So we tried to maintain that balance in the recommendations. And I do believe, because if you err on the side of national security, you can become very restrictive on the open architecture of the internet, which is not its origin and how it was designed from the beginning. So I'd start with the strategy. Now, the reason why, having been involved in some of the legislative debates, that I'm more comfortable with the internet model which is open collaboration and people solving the problems in their own, in a way that works, but it's in their own self-interest, versus the mandatory top-down, is because the technology moves so fast. And by the time you get through the legislative process, assuming it was really good, so I won't be judgmental on how effective our legislative process is, but let's assume it's world-class, Six Sigma, the best you could have anywhere in the world, right? Making that assumption, it still would be too late. It just moves too fast, so you really can't, right? I mean, I understand why you could make the argument for political reasons why you need to do these things and do whatever statements or orders or whatever, but the technology is not going to wait and stop. And it's not just going to be done here, because it's done all over the world. And there are really smart people over the world that are working on these kinds of issues. So my point being is that's why I really do believe we recommend, in a way, kind of this collaborative structure or center to bring people together. I really find that if there was a set of mileposts of strategic guidelines that kind of set the rules of the road, which is, I think, something that could be done through policy. So we know when, in John's world, it's just, it's an act of war, or it's just a minor, offense, like minor theft of robbing the bank. I hate to say that's a minor, but compared to an act of war, it's certainly different. Where there are some mileposts and some guidelines where then you could form this collaborative approach. I think there's hope to solve some of the problems. I really don't think they can be solved legislatively, and I only make the argument as looking at it from an engineering and technology point of view. It just goes too fast, and the skills are global. So there's almost nothing you can do here to stop it everywhere else in the world. And whatever you do everywhere else in the world will come here because it's an open internet.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Davis Robinson, Olin Mooring, and former legal advisor to the Department of State. I'd like to ask my old friend John Negroponte, has the internet made the ancient craft of espionage and counter-espionage, has it made it harder, has it made it easier, or has it made it both?
I think it's made everything faster. I think that's probably the one thing that's happened, the rate at which information moves around. But the other thing I'd say in terms of analysis, which is after all the end product of an intelligence process, you have to look at an awful lot more information. So how do you sort the wheat out from the chaff and distill things down to what you really want the decision makers to know? But on balance, I think the internet and modern technology have made intelligence far better. And I think particularly with respect to the integration of information on the one hand and the ability to use it on a real-time basis on the other. Both those key elements of intelligence and of operational activity have been improved dramatically by the advent of information technology and its progress.
Right here in front is. No, it's your turn.
Diana Lady Dugan, CSIS and Cyber Century Forum. I can't help but remember, and I'm going to do part of this to John, because we know from past experience that so much is economic and and political, not just technological. And so I wondered a couple of things. You've already referenced the fact that you didn't have any young people on your task force. In your report, did you make any recommendations relating to getting at the culture of it's cool to hack and how to get young people to realize that this is another form of stealing? And the second question is the degree to which you reviewed the many treaties and laws that are on the books related to intellectual property, trade, copyright, and other things. And I would make a third question and comment, and that is, the United States, Canada, and Europe, and just a few countries in Asia walked away basically from the agreement in the ITU in Dubai. And so we have a lot of homework, and I don't know what references you made to that, but that is a really serious demonstration of both our arrogance and naivete.
But the ITU model, correct me if I'm wrong, sort of didn't exactly conform to the multi-stakeholder vision that you all have advocated.
That's correct, although my understanding is that the ITU agreed a number of years ago that we would continue with the current governance of the internet while we debate these other issues. So I think that's why the current system is still in force. So that'd be one point. One of the recommendations the Commission makes, and Adam, you may want to chime in on this also, is that we better prepare for the ITU meetings and do it a little bit more beforehand, because the last big session in Dubai. We only appointed our delegation head at the very last minute. I gather the next meeting in 2014 will not be one of these large-scale meetings, and we already have the head of the delegation in place in the Department of State. But anyway, more attention to the ITU and preparation for those negotiations. Adam, do you want to?
Yeah. So
And Adam, answer the point also about the cultural issue.
yeah. So I mean, working backwards. 55 countries refused. So it wasn't just us and a handful. It was 55 countries refused to sign. But I take your point. We have more work to do, and the task force suggests a three-pronged strategy. And the first John mentioned, which is engaging the ITU earlier. But the second is to reinforce these multi-state mechanisms that already exist to bring developing countries into it. So the Government Affairs Committee of ICANN and the IGF, the Internet Governance Forum, which are not really being used in the way that they could be, because lots of developing countries don't know about them. They haven't sent representatives before. They don't have the resources to go there. And then a third is to search for alternative forums. Right? So there's lots of people who we think there should be discussions outside of the ITU on cybersecurity where we need to have more development capacity building. On the young people thing, it is a problem for the council broadly, but I do think we're talking. No offense to anyone in the audience or up here, but it is. I think two things are going on. One is we do talk about identify a hacker ethos, but not in the negative way that you brought out, which is everything is free, but in the positive way of let's hack this system and make it better, or let's build something ourselves. And how do you get those types of people to come do government service, right? How do you involve them both on the defensive side and the offensive side, right? Because it's not all just stealing and downloading music. It's also about, the guys who created Tumblr and Facebook and all those things, right? They all think of themselves as hacker, right? You go to Facebook, there's a big sign that says hacker up there. So how do you get them to contribute? And part of that is we have an idea about a cyber service, right? How do people think of themselves as a kind of esprit de corps elite group that are involved in this government work? But the other is, how can the council engage smaller startups in California, in the Washington area, in Route 128, who would traditionally be outside the scope of the council? How can we engage them and have them be involved in these policy decisions?
I'm curious, speaking of that hacker culture, I mean, the task force is critical, for example, of the development of people that develop and sell zero-day exploits and backdoors. But those happen to be really important tools in offensive war, and I happen to know that the NSA is actually looking for people that have those skills. So I'm sort of curious about that disconnect here. I mean, are these people who potentially are really serving the American interest?
Well, I should have added that we actually have a hacker on the task force, right? So Jeff Moss was a hacker. He started DEF CON, which is one of the biggest conferences for hackers, and now I don't think anyone thinks that Jeff Moss is playing a negative role, right? He is the chief of security for ICANN, and he serves on the advisory committee for the Department of Homeland Security for these exact issues. I think on the proliferation of malware, we actually see this as an interesting place for government-to-government discussions, right? Because this is one of the areas where the Chinese and the Russians, at least for malware focused on critical infrastructure, on energy sectors, they don't want these things ending up in the hands of Al-Qaeda or non-state actors either. So these are difficult conversations, right? But how can you kind of bring them into this space?
As the NYPD would say, we flipped him, right?
Yeah.
We flipped them.
Well, you definitely want those guys on your side.
Fucking assholes.
And I don't know what they have to say.